Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Is it a shadow? I woke up one morning, my heart pounding as though it had been racing all night. The faint light filtering through my curtains painted a serene picture, but something in the air felt off. It was as if a weight pressed against my chest, a foreboding presence lurking just beyond my perception. I tried to shake off the feeling, convincing myself it was just the remnants of a restless night. But as I went about my day, an unsettling thought crept into my mind. Was I truly alone? The streets outside seemed normal, bustling with the usual chatter of neighbors and the distant hum of traffic. I stepped outside, taking in the crisp autumn air. The leaves crunched beneath my feet, a comforting sound that reminded me of simpler times. But as I walked down the familiar path to the local cafe, a fleeting shadow caught my eye. I paused, squinting against the bright morning light. I was sure I had seen something dark behind a tree, something that felt unnervingly familiar. I shook my head, chiding myself for being jumpy. After all, I was just a 28-year-old woman with a steady job and a routine. Yet, as the days went by, that fleeting feeling refused to dissipate. Every evening, after returning home, I noticed a peculiar shift in the atmosphere. My modest apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, and I often found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to find someone or something lurking behind me. The creeping anxiety reached its peak one night while I was watching television. The flickering images on the screen seemed to warp and twist as I caught sight of a dark shape moving just outside my window. I jumped up, rushing to the glass, but found only the stillness of the night. My heart raced as I pressed my forehead against the cool surface, scanning the dimly lit street below. Had I imagined it? The moon hung high, casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement, distorting reality in a way that felt almost surreal. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was it merely my imagination, or was there a presence that had taken root in my life? I thought back to the shadow I had seen. It was unlike any shadow I had ever encountered. It moved independently, as if it had a will of its own. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was following me. The next day, I decided to confront my fears head-on. I ventured into the park where I had first spotted the shadow. The familiar trees loomed above me, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. As I walked along the winding path, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I turned frequently, half hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever had taken residence in my life. But all I found was the soft rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children playing. Then, as I rounded a bend, I saw it again. The dark shape darted between the trees, just out of sight. My breath hitched in my throat. It was like a cruel game of hide and seek, and I was the unwilling participant. Determined, I quickened my pace, the urge to confront this specter growing stronger. With every step, my heart pounded louder, drowning out the sounds of the world around me. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty park. "Show yourself." But there was no response, only silence and the distant call of birds overhead. I felt a chill run down my spine, an instinctive fear that whispered of danger. What was this thing that haunted my footsteps, and why did it feel so intent on making itself known? As I returned home, the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a curtain of darkness in its wake. I tried to calm my racing heart, telling myself it was nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. The shadow wasn't merely a trick of the light, it was a manifestation of something far more sinister, a harbinger of the terror that awaited me. The next few nights were plagued with nightmares. I dreamed of the shadow, creeping closer and closer, its form shifting and changing. Each time it drew near, I awoke in a cold sweat, heart racing, with the lingering sensation that it was more than just a dream. It was a warning, a premonition of what was to come. I was trapped in a cycle of fear, unable to escape the grip of the unknown. I tried to confide in my friends, sharing the bizarre experiences that had begun to consume my thoughts. But their dismissive laughter only deepened my sense of isolation. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you," they said, brushing off my concerns as if they were nothing. But how could I explain the feeling that something dark and malevolent was lurking just out of sight? One evening, as I sat in the living room, the lights flickered ominously. The shadows seemed to stretch and warp, merging with the darkness. It was then that I felt it, a presence behind me, cold and suffocating. I turned slowly, heart in my throat, and for a brief moment, I caught sight of it, a dark figure, indistinct yet undeniably real, its form twisted and grotesque. It felt as though it was studying me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Panic surged within me, and I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the silence, but it was drowned out by the voice in my head, screaming for me to run. I bolted for the door, every instinct screaming at me to escape. But as I reached for the handle, the shadow lurched forward, and the room plunged into darkness. That was the moment I knew this was no ordinary shadow. This was a predator, stalking me through the fabric of my reality, intent on claiming its prize. The darkness swallowed me whole, a suffocating void that pressed against my skin like an invisible hand. I fumbled for the doorknob, heart racing as the chilling sensation of being watched enveloped me. I could hear my own breaths echoing in the silence, each gasp a reminder of the impending danger that lurked just beyond my sight. The shadow was there, waiting, its presence palpable in the air around me. Finally, I managed to twist the doorknob and burst out into the night, the cool air hitting me like a slap to the face. I stumbled into the street, the world outside appearing almost normal, as if the horror inside had been merely a figment of my imagination. But the adrenaline coursing through my veins told me otherwise. I was not safe. I was being hunted. In the days that followed, I took to sleeping with the lights on, convinced that the glow would keep the darkness at bay. But no matter how many bulbs I replaced or how brightly I lit the space, I could still feel the shadow creeping ever closer. It lingered just at the edge of my consciousness, a constant reminder of the threat that shadowed my every move. I found myself growing more isolated as the days passed. Friends would call, wanting to meet for dinner or drinks, but I would make excuses, unwilling to risk being away from the safety of my home. I became a recluse, trapped within the walls of my own mind, spiraling deeper into fear. Each creak of the floorboards or rustle of the wind sent me into a panic, the shadows growing longer as the sun set. On one particularly restless night, I decided to confront my fears. I pulled out my phone, determined to document every strange occurrence. Perhaps writing it down would help me make sense of what was happening. I typed out my experiences, detailing the shadow's movements, the feeling of being pursued, the way it seemed to mimic my own motions, almost as if it were a reflection gone rogue. But as I wrote, I felt a strange compulsion to look up. The sensation of eyes boring into my back was overwhelming. I turned slowly, half expecting to see nothing but the darkened corners of my living room. Instead, I found myself face to face with a shadow, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. My heart lurched, a mix of terror and disbelief flooding my senses. It was closer than ever, and for a moment, I felt paralyzed, caught in the grip of sheer panic. The darkness seemed to ripple, forming into vague shapes that almost resembled a grotesque smile. I stumbled backward, dropping my phone, the screen shattering against the hardwood floor. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the walls, but the shadow only seemed to grow bolder, inching toward me, its form shifting and swirling as if it were alive. I could feel its cold presence brushing against my skin, a whisper of death that sent shivers down my spine. In a frantic bid for survival, I dashed to the kitchen, searching for something, anything, that could help me fend off this nightmare. My hands trembled as I grabbed a knife from the counter, its blade gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I turned, facing the darkness, ready to confront whatever horror it was that tormented me. But just as I took a step forward, the lights flickered again, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I swung the knife in wild arcs, desperate to ward off the shadow. "Get back!" I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. And then, for a moment, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, as though a part of me had accepted my fate. The room felt alive with tension, the shadow moving fluidly around me, as if it was toying with my fear. I could almost hear its laughter, a sinister echo that made my skin crawl. The sensation of being stalked grew stronger. It was no longer just a shadow, but a hunter, and I was its prey. Suddenly, the lights flickered back to life, illuminating the room in a harsh glow. I was alone, but the knife trembled in my hand, and the memory of the shadow's presence lingered. I glanced around, breathing heavily, my mind racing. It couldn't be gone. It had been here, so close, and now it felt like it was lurking in the corners of my mind. Days turned into weeks, each blending into the next, as I tried to resume a semblance of normalcy. I returned to work, forcing a smile on my face as I navigated the mundane tasks of my job. But the shadow remained, always on the periphery of my thoughts, creeping into my dreams and disrupting my every moment of peace. I was a ghost in my own life, haunted by a darkness that refused to fade. Then one evening, as I sat in the cafe nursing a cup of coffee, I noticed a stranger sitting across the room. He was watching me intently, his gaze unnerving. I met his eyes briefly, and a chill ran down my spine. The intensity of his stare was like a spotlight, illuminating the very fears I had tried to bury. There was something about him, something that felt strangely familiar, as if I had seen him before. But I couldn't place where or when. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the warm drink in my hands, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. I glanced up again, and to my horror, the man had moved closer, now standing at the entrance of the cafe, his eyes locked onto mine. My heart raced, the panic rising as the world around me blurred. Just then, the door swung open, and a gust of wind rushed through the room. I turned, instinctively looking over my shoulder, and there it was, the shadow. It stood just outside the cafe, merging with the darkness of the evening, its shape indistinct yet undeniably real. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized the truth. The stranger and the shadow were one and the same. I bolted from my seat, throwing money on the table as I ran for the exit. My instincts screamed at me to escape, to put as much distance between myself and that dark figure as possible. But as I stepped outside, the chill of the night enveloped me, and I felt it close in, both the stranger and the shadow, intertwining in a dance of dread. I turned down the street, desperate to outrun my pursuer, but the sensation of being trapped weighed heavily on my shoulders. I was caught in a web of terror, my heart pounding in rhythm with the footsteps echoing behind me. The shadow was relentless, always a step behind, a constant reminder that I was never truly safe. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered to myself, my voice trembling with fear. But the only response was the sound of my own racing heart and the soft whisper of the wind, taunting me as it carried the weight of my impending doom. I sprinted down the dimly lit street, the pavement blurring beneath my hurried steps. Each breath burned in my chest as the cold air rushed into my lungs, but I couldn't afford to slow down. The weight of the shadow pressed against me, its presence a chilling reminder that I was not alone. The stranger, a reflection of my darkest fears, was close behind, a ghost haunting my every move. My mind raced as I recalled every horror story I had ever read. This felt like one of them, a twisted narrative where the protagonist could not escape the fate that awaited her. I glanced over my shoulder, and there it was, his silhouette flickering in and out of the streetlights, an extension of the darkness itself. The way he moved was unsettling, as though he flowed like liquid shadow, effortlessly weaving between the light and dark. In a panic, I turned down an alley, hoping to lose him in the labyrinth of narrow passageways. The walls were lined with graffiti, vibrant colors clashing with the oppressive night. I ducked behind a dumpster, heart hammering against my ribs, and held my breath. The stench of garbage mingled with the dampness of the evening air, but I didn't care. I needed to stay quiet, to blend into the shadows, just as he did. Minutes felt like hours as I waited in silence, my pulse echoing in my ears. I strained to listen for any sign of his presence, but all I heard was the distant hum of traffic. Just as I began to hope that I had lost him, a flicker of movement caught my eye at the entrance of the alley. The stranger stood there, peering into the darkness, his eyes glinting like shards of glass in the moonlight. come out, wherever you are," he called, his voice smooth and mocking. The way he spoke sent chills down my spine. It was as if he relished the hunt, drawing out my fear like a fine wine. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, the very instinct to flee fighting against the paralyzing grip of terror. I had to escape. Mustering every ounce of courage, I slipped out from behind the dumpster, my body moving on instinct. I darted further into the alley, desperate for an exit. I could hear his footsteps behind me, their rhythm matching my own in a twisted dance of predator and prey. I spotted a door to my left and pushed it open, slamming it shut behind me. I was in a darkened hallway, the air thick with the scent of mildew. I leaned against the door, listening intently, my breath ragged as I tried to calm my racing heart. I strained to hear any sign of him following me. Silence settled around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting. Think, I muttered to myself, my mind racing. I needed a plan. I couldn't keep running forever. The shadow could easily outpace me, and if I didn't find a way to confront it, I would be trapped in this cycle of fear. I stepped cautiously down the hall, my footsteps echoing softly against the concrete floor. There were doors lining either side, each one a potential refuge or a gateway to more danger. I hesitated, unsure which path to take, when a soft sound caught my attention. It was a low whisper, like a voice calling out from the depths of the building. Help, it beckoned, a haunting melody that resonated with my fear. I felt drawn to it, but a part of me warned against it. I had no idea what lay behind those doors, and the last thing I needed was to walk into a trap. Yet the voice seemed desperate, an echo of my own internal struggle, pulling me in like a siren's call. Against my better judgment, I moved toward the sound, the whisper growing clearer with each step. It felt both comforting and terrifying, a strange blend of hope and dread. I reached for the nearest door and turned the knob, pushing it open slowly. Inside was a small room filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. Dust motes floated in the slanting light filtering through a grimy window. The voice seemed to come from the corner of the room. My eyes were drawn to a figure huddled beneath one of the sheets. "Please, help me," it whispered again, and my heart skipped a beat. Was it a trap? Or was this someone else who had fallen victim to the shadow? "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaky as I approached cautiously. I pulled back the sheet, revealing a woman with hollow eyes and an expression of sheer terror. She looked like a specter of despair, a warning from the depths of this nightmare. "I don't have much time," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "It's coming. You have to escape. It wants to take you too." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my breath catch in my throat as fear constricted around my chest. "Why are you here?" I pressed, desperate for answers. "What is it?" "It's not just a shadow," she whispered, trembling. "It feeds on fear, and it knows your weaknesses. You must face it, or it will consume you. You can't run forever." Her words sent a jolt of realization through me. I had been living in fear, allowing it to dictate my actions. But how could I confront something so dark, so insidious? As if sensing my hesitation, she gripped my arm tightly. "You're stronger than you think," she urged, her voice rising in intensity. "Don't let it control you. Fight back." Just then, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway, drawing closer. My heart raced, panic surging as I realized time was running out. I turned to the woman, ready to ask for her help, but she was already fading into the shadows, her form becoming indistinct. "No!" I cried, reaching out, but she vanished, leaving me alone with the encroaching darkness. I felt the cold tendrils of fear wrapping around my throat, squeezing tighter as I prepared to face the shadow. I stepped back into the hallway, the air thick with tension. The footsteps grew louder, resonating with a rhythm that matched my own fear. I could sense it behind me, the darkness closing in, its intent as clear as the night sky outside. I steeled myself, knowing I couldn't keep running. It was time to confront the terror head-on. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. The hallway grew silent, the only sound my own breath, quick and shallow. I felt the shadow linger just beyond my sight, watching, waiting for the moment to strike. With a newfound determination, I stepped forward, ready to face whatever nightmare awaited me. I wasn't just going to be a victim, I would fight back against the darkness that sought to consume me. As I moved through the hallway, I could feel the weight of the shadow pressing against me, its form swirling like a tempest of despair. I had to find a way to break its hold, to reclaim my life from its grasp. "Enough!" I shouted into the void, my voice echoing through the darkness. "You won't take me." The shadow responded with a low growl, its form shifting as it seemed to congeal around me. I could feel its energy, dark and malevolent, a tangible force that sought to extinguish my light. I pressed on, fueled by the words of the woman who had warned me, determined to confront my fears head-on. "I am not afraid of you," I declared, my voice unwavering. "You are nothing but a reflection of my own darkness, and I refuse to be your prey." With each step I took, the shadows around me seemed to waver, flickering like candle flames in a storm. I concentrated on my own light, the warmth that flickered within me, and I envisioned it growing brighter, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. As I reached the end of the hallway, I could see a faint light beyond a door at the far end. I rushed toward it, fueled by desperation and hope. With a swift kick, I pushed the door open and stepped into the light. As I stepped into the light, I was momentarily blinded by its brightness. It enveloped me like a warm embrace, and I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of fear lift slightly from my chest. The room was filled with soft golden light, the air rich with the scent of fresh flowers. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to my surroundings. This place felt like a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the darkness that had been my constant companion. But my relief was short-lived. As I regained my bearings, I realized the door I had come through had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable wall of light. Panic surged within me as I turned in circles, desperately seeking a way out. I was trapped in this strange haven, alone with my thoughts and the remnants of my fear. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "Is anyone here?" The only answer was silence, but the soft light remained constant, casting long shadows that flickered at the edges of my vision. I moved deeper into the room, each step filled with uncertainty. The light grew brighter as I approached the center, where I discovered a large mirror standing tall against the wall. Its surface shimmered like water, and I felt an inexplicable pull to it. I hesitated, knowing that mirrors had always been a source of both fascination and fear for me. Gathering my courage, I stepped closer, the reflection revealing not just my physical self, but a swirl of emotions, fear, confusion, and a glimmer of defiance. I raised my hand to touch the surface, and as my fingertips brushed against it, the mirror rippled, distorting my image and pulling me closer. Suddenly, I was drawn into the mirror, a sensation like being submerged in cold water. I gasped as the world shifted around me, and when I opened my eyes, I found myself in a darkened forest, the light replaced by an eerie twilight. Trees towered around me, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the deepening sky. My heart sank as I realized I was no longer in a safe haven, but rather a realm that felt palpably alive with danger. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows shifted among the trees, flickering like flames. I could feel the shadow's presence, coiling around me like a serpent waiting to strike. "Where are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the stillness. I felt foolish for calling out, but I needed to confront the shadow, to challenge it once and for all. The forest seemed to hold its breath, a hush falling over the landscape as if it were anticipating my next move. Then, from the depths of the shadows, I heard a whisper, barely audible yet unmistakably familiar. "You cannot escape me. You belong to the darkness." The voice was cold and taunting, sending chills racing down my spine. I steeled myself, refusing to let fear take hold. "I am not yours," I yelled, my voice ringing with defiance. I refused to be a prisoner of my own nightmares. The shadows stirred, and suddenly the forest erupted in chaos. The trees creaked and groaned as they twisted, the ground shifting beneath my feet. I stumbled, grappling for balance as the world around me transformed into a swirling tempest of darkness and light. In the midst of the chaos, I caught sight of a figure emerging from the shadows. It was the stranger, the embodiment of my fears, his face obscured by the darkness. His eyes glowed like embers, flickering with malice as he stepped closer, each movement deliberate and menacing. "Did you really think you could outrun your own shadow?" he sneered, his voice low and mocking. "You can't escape who you are. You are bound to me, and I will never let you go." The words hit me like a physical blow, the weight of his statement pressing down on my chest. I felt the panic rising, threatening to overwhelm me, but I remembered the woman in the room filled with light. She had said I was stronger than I knew, and I had to believe that. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and took a step forward. "I will not be your puppet," I shouted, my voice steady. "You are nothing but a reflection of my fears, and I will not let you control me any longer." The shadows around me writhed, and the stranger's expression twisted into one of rage. "You think you can defy me?" he hissed, and as he lunged forward, the world shifted again, pulling me into a nightmarish landscape. I found myself in a barren wasteland, the sky a swirling mass of dark clouds. The air was heavy with despair, and I could feel the weight of my fear pressing against me. But I would not let it consume me. I could see the shadow lurking at the edges of my vision, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. I closed my eyes and focused, remembering the warmth of the light from before. I pictured it growing within me, a flickering flame of hope and strength. As I opened my eyes, I envisioned that light pouring from my heart, illuminating the darkness that surrounded me. "Enough of this," I declared, raising my hands as the light began to radiate from me. The shadows recoiled, the darkness shrinking back in response to the brightness I had summoned. The shadow, my shadow, flickered, its form losing cohesion as it writhed in agony. "You cannot extinguish me," it roared, the voice a cacophony of rage and fear. "I am a part of you." "Not anymore," I shouted, my voice echoing with newfound conviction. "I am not defined by my fears. I am stronger than you." With a final burst of energy, I released the light, watching as it engulfed the shadow. The darkness writhed and twisted, howling in protest, but I held my ground, channeling every ounce of strength I possessed. The light expanded, consuming the shadow until there was nothing left but a flickering haze in the air. The landscape around me began to dissolve, the darkness receding like a tide. I felt a sense of liberation wash over me as I realized I was free. I had faced my fears, confronted the darkness that had haunted me, and emerged stronger. But as the shadows faded, I felt a pang of sadness for the part of me that had been lost. The darkness was a part of my story, a reflection of the struggles I had faced. I had learned that fear could be both a prison and a teacher, and now I was ready to embrace the light. Suddenly, I was back in the room filled with light, the mirror standing before me, its surface shimmering with possibility. I looked at my reflection, seeing not just a survivor but a warrior who had faced the depths of darkness and emerged victorious. With a newfound sense of purpose, I turned away from the mirror, ready to embrace the world outside. The darkness no longer held power over me. I was free to write my own story, one filled with hope, courage, and the strength to face whatever came next. As I stepped through the door that had reappeared, I felt the warmth of the sun on my skin, the light washing over me like a gentle tide. I had faced my shadow, and now it was time to live. The sun bathed the world in a golden glow as I stepped out into the open air, a wave of warmth washing over me. The shadows that had once haunted my every moment now felt distant, mere echoes of a past I was finally ready to leave behind. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of fresh air, the promise of a new beginning lingering on the horizon. But as I walked through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, an unsettling sensation crept over me. It was as if the shadows of the past were still lingering just out of sight, waiting for the moment to strike again. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the dark figure trailing behind me. Nothing was there, only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children playing. Yet, the feeling persisted, a low hum of anxiety thrumming in my veins. I knew I had confronted my fears, but had I truly defeated them? Or was I merely fooling myself, believing I had escaped the darkness when it still lurked in the corners of my mind? As the day unfolded, I tried to immerse myself in the ordinary, visiting friends, running errands, and even treating myself to a cup of coffee at my favorite cafe. But no matter how hard I tried, the unease remained, a lingering whisper in the back of my mind. The shadow might be gone, but its impact was indelible, leaving a mark that would take time to heal. In the evening, I returned home, the sun dipping low in the sky, painting everything in hues of orange and pink. I settled on the couch, determined to shake off the remnants of dread that clung to me like a second skin. I flipped through a book, but my concentration waned as my mind drifted back to the mirror, the forest, and the shadow that had nearly consumed me. Suddenly, a sound broke through my thoughts, a soft tapping at the window. My heart raced as I turned, dread pooling in my stomach. I approached the window cautiously, peering through the curtains. The street outside was empty, the twilight casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. I shook my head, willing myself to remain calm. It was just the wind, I told myself. Nothing more. I turned away, but the moment I did, the tapping came again, more insistent this time. My heart thudded in my chest as I glanced back at the window. This time, I noticed a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. With trembling hands, I pulled back the curtain, and my breath caught in my throat. There, on the other side of the glass, stood the figure of the stranger, the embodiment of my fears, his silhouette stark against the fading light. His eyes glowed with that same malevolence, a smirk creeping across his face as if he relished my shock. "I told you I would never let you go," he said, his voice smooth and chilling. Panic surged through me, the remnants of my courage evaporating in an instant. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. How was this possible? I had banished him. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice trembling as I stumbled back, seeking refuge in the far corner of the room. "You're nothing but a figment of my imagination." He laughed, a low, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. Am I? Or am I merely the truth you refuse to face? You can run, but you cannot hide from what you are. The shadows in the room began to thicken, curling around the corners like wisps of smoke. My heart raced as I realized I was trapped once more, the darkness returning to claim what it had lost. I had faced the shadow before, but this felt different. It was no longer just a haunting presence, it was a manifestation of my own doubts and insecurities, clawing its way back into my life. "Why won't you just go away?" I cried, the tears spilling down my cheeks. "I've fought you. I've defeated you." "Defeated me?" he echoed, his voice dripping with disdain. "You can't defeat what is a part of you. I will always be here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for your moments of weakness. You are never truly free." Desperation gripped me, and I felt the walls closing in. I was spiraling back into that dark abyss, the suffocating grip of fear tightening around my throat. But then, I remembered the light, the warmth that had once enveloped me. It was time to reclaim it once and for all. "No!" I shouted, forcing myself to stand tall. "You may be a part of me, but you don't control me. I am stronger than you think." With that, I closed my eyes and concentrated, envisioning the light within me, the flicker of hope that had carried me through my darkest moments. I focused on it, feeling it swell within my chest until it ignited into a blazing flame. When I opened my eyes, I thrust my hands forward, releasing that light into the room. It burst forth, illuminating every dark corner, dispelling the shadows that clung to the walls. The stranger recoiled, his form flickering like a dying flame as the light grew brighter, engulfing him. "And oh," he screamed, his voice mingling with the cacophony of shadows. "You can't do this. You need me. "I don't need you," I declared, my voice steady and resolute. "You are nothing but a fear I have chosen to overcome." The light surged, swallowing the darkness whole, and for the first time, I felt the weight of my fears lift. The figure shrieked as the light consumed him, dissolving his form into nothingness, the shadows collapsing in on themselves as they were extinguished. As the last vestiges of darkness vanished, I stood there, breathing heavily, the realization washing over me like a cleansing wave. I had faced my deepest fears and emerged victorious, not as a victim but as a warrior. The room was now filled with a gentle glow, the light warm and reassuring. I felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of the shadow that had haunted me for so long. I had finally reclaimed my power, and it felt exhilarating. In that moment, I knew I would not forget the lessons I had learned. The journey had been arduous, but it had transformed me in ways I had yet to fully comprehend. I had faced the darkness within me, and in doing so, I had forged a path toward healing and acceptance. With a deep breath, I stepped away from the window and into the light, ready to embrace whatever came next. Life would always have its challenges, but I was no longer afraid. I had confronted my shadow, and now I could walk into the world with confidence, ready to create my own story, one filled with hope, courage, and a newfound strength that would guide me through the darkest of nights. The mystery of the old hospital. Have you ever wondered what happens to those who leave this world too soon? What if their spirits linger, seeking vengeance for the life that was stolen from them? My story begins in the most unexpected place, an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of my hometown. This place, once a sanctuary of healing, had become a haunting memory, echoing with the whispers of those who had suffered within its crumbling walls. I stumbled upon the hospital on a foggy autumn evening. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the kind of chill that prickles your skin and makes you feel alive and yet terrified. My friends dared me to explore it. They thought it was just an old building, nothing more. But as I approached the rusted gates, I felt a strange pull, as if the shadows within were beckoning me closer. The moment I stepped through the entrance, the atmosphere shifted. Dust motes danced in the fading light, and the silence was overwhelming, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. I could almost hear the laughter of children from years gone by, mingling with the muffled cries of patients who had once filled these halls. The walls were adorned with peeling paint, revealing layers of forgotten stories. I felt an uncanny mix of curiosity and dread wash over me. As I wandered deeper into the hospital, I stumbled upon the old surgical room. The stark white tiles had yellowed with age, and rusted instruments lay scattered on the counter like forgotten relics of a dark past. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were following my every move. With each step, my heart raced, and I had to remind myself that I was here to confront the stories that lay buried beneath the surface. Suddenly, I heard a soft whimpering sound. It echoed through the empty halls, sending chills down my spine. I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it just the wind, or something more sinister? Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. The whimpering grew louder, more desperate, leading me to a small room at the end of the corridor. As I opened the door, I was greeted by a chilling sight. The room was filled with dusty furniture, but in the center stood a solitary rocking chair that seemed to sway back and forth on its own. My breath caught in my throat as I approached. That's when I noticed it, a frayed doll sitting in the chair, its glassy eyes staring blankly at me. I felt an inexplicable sadness wash over me, as if the doll were a vessel for the lost souls of the hospital. I reached out to touch it, and the moment my fingers brushed against the worn fabric, I was flooded with visions, fragments of memories from the patients who had once occupied this place. I saw glimpses of their pain, their fear, and ultimately their desperation. I staggered back, my mind reeling. These were not just memories, they were cries for help, cries that had gone unanswered for far too long. Suddenly, the air grew heavy, thick with an oppressive energy that sent my heart racing. I heard whispers swirling around me, rising and falling like a dark melody. "Help us," they seemed to plead, echoing through the empty halls. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. My pulse quickened, and I pounded on the door, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I could feel the weight of the shadows pressing in on me, closing off any chance of escape. I was trapped. Just as I began to lose hope, I remembered the window on the other side of the room. I rushed towards it, my heart pounding in my ears. As I reached the window, I realized I was not alone. In the dim light, I saw faint silhouettes emerging from the corners of the room, their forms twisted and distorted. Their faces were obscured, but I could sense their anger and sorrow. They were the patients, the lost souls of this forsaken hospital. Their voices grew louder, their cries piercing the suffocating silence. "You cannot leave. You must understand our pain." I pressed my hands against the cold glass, desperately trying to find a way out. The whispers enveloped me, filling my mind with haunting memories that threatened to overwhelm me. I was no longer just an observer, I was part of their story. I felt their anguish, their desire for justice, and suddenly it dawned on me, this wasn't just about them, it was about me too. As the shadows closed in, I realized that the past was not finished with me. It was time to uncover the truth behind the hospital's dark history, to learn why these souls had been left to wander and what they truly wanted from me. But as I turned to face them, the world around me began to fade into darkness. I awoke on the cold, tiled floor of the old surgical room, my heart racing. The whispers had faded, leaving only an eerie silence that hung in the air like a heavy fog. I pushed myself up, my limbs trembling as I took in my surroundings. The doll still sat in the rocking chair, its glassy eyes now seemingly glistening in the dim light, watching me intently. I knew I had to leave, but a part of me felt tethered to this place. The memories I had glimpsed, the sorrow etched in the very walls of this hospital, lingered in my mind like a haunting melody. I stumbled toward the door, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon me, and opened it slowly, half expecting to find the shadows waiting for me on the other side. To my relief, the corridor was empty, though it was drenched in a thick, oppressive silence. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something strange. The air felt charged, almost electric. I could feel a presence, an unseen force guiding me further into the depths of the hospital. Against my better judgment, I followed it, curiosity and dread intertwining within me. I wandered through the halls, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Faded photographs lined the walls, capturing the once vibrant lives of the patients who had walked these corridors. Their faces, pale and somber, seemed to tell a story of despair. I paused in front of one photo, a young girl with a bright smile, her eyes twinkling with innocence. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Emily, Forever 5." My heart sank. Emily had been a patient here, and she had never left. I felt a deep sorrow wash over me, mingling with the fear that clung to my skin. Why had this place been abandoned? What horrors had transpired within its walls that forced the living to turn away? As I continued my exploration, I stumbled upon a nurse's station, cluttered with dusty papers and forgotten belongings. A tattered journal caught my eye, its pages yellowed and brittle. With trembling hands, I opened it, and the words leapt out at me, each one a revelation. Day 30. The patients are restless. They can sense something is wrong. I hear their whispers at night, begging for help. We must do something. Day 35. Dr. Hayes has started experiments on the patients. He believes he can bring them back to life, but I fear for their souls. They are not mere subjects, they are people. Day 40. Something has gone wrong. The patients are becoming aggressive. I can hear their screams in my dreams. If only someone would listen. The words sent shivers down my spine. This journal was a glimpse into the chaos that had enveloped this place. The doctor's experiments, the patient's unrest. Was it possible that their souls were trapped here, seeking revenge for the torment they had endured? Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I felt a rush of air brush past me. I turned sharply, the journal slipping from my fingers and landing on the floor with a soft thud. My heart raced as I sensed a presence behind me. I whipped around, my breath hitching in my throat. There, standing at the far end of the hall, was a figure draped in shadow. It was a man, his features obscured, but I could feel the weight of his gaze pressing upon me. He raised a hand, pointing directly at me, and I could almost hear the whispers of the other patients rising around him, echoing their fury and despair. You are here for a reason, the figure said, his voice a low rasp that sent chills down my spine. You must learn the truth. I stumbled backward, terror flooding my senses. What do you want from me? I shouted, my voice trembling. I'm not one of you. Not yet, he replied, stepping closer. But you will be. You cannot escape the fate of those who have suffered here. We need you to understand. His words hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt the walls closing in, the shadows creeping closer. My instincts screamed at me to run, but a deeper part of me was drawn to him. I could sense his pain, the agony of those who had been wronged. Help us, he pleaded, his voice now a whisper. Help us expose the truth behind this place. Help us find peace. The intensity of his gaze bore into my soul, awakening something deep within me, a desire to uncover the truth, to give a voice to the voiceless. I took a shaky breath, steeling myself against the terror that threatened to consume me. Okay, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll help you. A faint smile flickered across his shadowy visage, and I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. But with it came a wave of dread. What had I just committed to? As I began to comprehend the magnitude of my choice, the hospital shifted around me, walls closing in, rooms distorting into grotesque shapes. My heart raced as the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. I had entered a realm of nightmares, and I was not alone. The whispers enveloped me like a thick mist, swirling through the air, pulling me deeper into the hospital's dark heart. My breath quickened as I felt the walls pulse, as if the very building were alive, responding to my presence. I turned to face the figure, but he had vanished, leaving me alone in a corridor that felt endless and claustrophobic. Help us, the words echoed in my mind, mingling with the haunting whispers that grew louder, more insistent. I forced myself to move, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. I felt as if the walls were closing in on me, and the darkness grew thicker with every passing second. My thoughts raced as I retraced my steps back to the nurse's station. The journal lay on the floor where I had dropped it, and I picked it up, desperate for answers. As I flipped through the pages, the entries became more frantic, more desperate. Day 45. They are restless. I hear them at night, their cries piercing the silence. They want to be heard, to be acknowledged. Day 50. Dr. Hayes has locked them in the basement. I cannot bear to think of what he is doing to them. I fear for my life. Day 55. Something is happening. The air is thick with their anger. They are rising. I can feel it. My heart raced. Dr. Hayes had done something terrible, something that had bound the souls of those patients to this place. They were trapped, unable to move on, and now they were calling to me for help. I had to find that basement. I ventured down another corridor, the air becoming heavier as I neared the end. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows thickening around me. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet felt amplified in the oppressive silence. Finally, I stumbled upon a heavy door, its wood warped and aged. A rusted sign hung askew above it, reading morgue. My pulse quickened, and I hesitated, a chill creeping down my spine. The hospital's atmosphere felt charged, and I sensed I was standing at the threshold of something terrifying. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside. The room was dark, the air stale and cold. Rows of metal drawers lined the walls, each one a chilling reminder of lives lost within these walls. I could feel the weight of countless souls pressing down on me, their anguish palpable. As I moved deeper into the morgue, I heard a soft sound, like a muffled sob. I turned toward the noise, my heart racing. There, in the dim light, stood a figure cloaked in shadow. It was a woman, her hair falling in disheveled strands over her face, her clothes tattered and stained. "Please," she whispered, her voice fragile, "help me." "Who are you?" I asked, stepping closer. "What happened here?" "I was one of the patients," she replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Dr. Hayes, he didn't care about us. He saw us as experiments, not people. We were alive, but he took everything from us." Her words sent a shiver through me. This was a woman whose spirit had been shattered, her life reduced to a mere experiment. "How can I help you?" I asked, feeling the weight of her despair. "You must find the records," she urged, her voice trembling. "They are hidden in the basement. They hold the truth of what happened here. You must expose Dr. Hayes for what he did." Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the morgue, making me jump. The woman's expression shifted from sorrow to terror. "You must go. He's coming." Before I could react, the door slammed shut, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, more frenzied than before, and I felt the temperature drop, the air thickening with fear. I turned back to the woman, but she had vanished, leaving me alone with the shadows. "What do I do?" I cried out, my voice shaking. But the only response was the silence that enveloped me, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Desperation clawed at me. I felt trapped, but I remembered her words, the records in the basement. I had to escape this room and uncover the truth. I turned, searching for another way out, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, as if the darkness had a will of its own, a small glimmer caught my eye, a faint light coming from a crack in the wall. I rushed toward it, feeling a surge of hope. I pushed against the wall, and to my astonishment, it gave way, revealing a narrow passage. The whispers grew louder as I crawled through the passage, squeezing through the tight opening until I emerged in a dimly lit basement. The air was heavy with moisture and decay, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty boxes and old medical equipment. As I scanned the room, a sense of dread washed over me. The basement was a graveyard of forgotten memories, a tomb for secrets long buried. But somewhere down here, I knew I would find the truth. I moved deeper into the shadows, my heart pounding as I searched for the records. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. My stomach dropped as I turned to face the source of the sound, bracing myself for whatever nightmare waited. There, emerging from the darkness, was Dr. Hayes himself, his eyes cold and devoid of humanity. He looked older, more twisted, but there was no mistaking him. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "This is where I conduct my work." I backed away, panic surging through me. "What did you do to them?" "They deserve justice." He laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in the dim light. "Justice? They were nothing but failures. You cannot save them, nor can you escape this place." His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper into my resolve. I had to stand my ground. "I will expose you. You will pay for what you've done." "Foolish girl," he sneered, stepping closer. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. They're mine now. Forever." The air grew thick with a palpable tension, the whispers rising to a fever pitch. I felt the darkness closing in, suffocating me as I stood my ground against the monster before me. I needed to find those records. I needed to expose him and set the trapped souls free. But could I do it before he silenced me forever? Dr. Hayes stepped closer, his face twisted with a cruel smile that sent a chill down my spine. I could feel the darkness pulsating around us, almost alive, as if the very shadows were in league with him. "Don't you see? They are bound to me," he said, gesturing around him. "This is their resting place, their prison. They chose to linger in agony rather than accept their fate. I merely facilitated their despair." I was gripped by fear, but anger surged within me, igniting a fire I didn't know I had. "You're a monster," I spat, my voice steadying. "You've stolen their lives, their dignity, and now you want to silence me? No. I will expose you." "Expose me?" he echoed mockingly, stepping back as if to assess me. "You think you can walk out of here with the truth? You have no idea how deep the roots of this place run. No one will believe you." As he spoke, I noticed movement in the shadows behind him. The whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of tortured voices. It was as if the spirits of the patients had gathered, their collective anger coalescing into a palpable force that hung in the air. "Help us!" I heard their cries, desperate and haunting. "Help us!" Fueled by their anguish, I felt a sudden surge of courage. "I don't need anyone to believe me," I said firmly, glancing around the basement for something to use as a weapon. My eyes landed on a rusted scalpel resting on a nearby table, its blade glinting in the dim light. I darted toward it, grabbing the handle and holding it tightly. "You can't keep them here forever." "Foolish girl," he thundered, fury lighting up his eyes. He lunged forward, but I was ready. I dodged to the side, the scalpel poised to strike. The whispers swelled around us, echoing my resolve. "You've caused enough pain," I shouted, brandishing the weapon. "You will not take any more lives." The confrontation escalated into chaos. Dr. Hayes lunged again, but I sidestepped him, my heart racing as I fought to stay one step ahead. With every movement, I felt the spirits of the patients pushing me forward, giving me strength. Finally, I found a moment of clarity amid the madness. I turned and raced toward the shelves filled with dusty boxes. "The records!" I shouted, searching frantically through the debris. I knew the truth was buried somewhere in this tomb of memories, and I had to uncover it. "Stop!" he roared, his voice like thunder, but the spirits urged me on. I tore through the boxes, my hands shaking. Then, I spotted a leather-bound folder wedged in the back of a shelf, dust-covered but intact. I pulled it out, my heart racing as I flipped it open. Inside were the patient records, documenting the horrific experiments and treatments Dr. Hayes had subjected them to. "This is it," I shouted, holding it up as proof. "This is your downfall." With a snarl, he charged at me, but in that moment, the room erupted with energy. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, and I felt a force pushing me back. I stumbled, but the spirits were with me, pulling me away from him. "No!" Dr. Hayes screamed, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. They are mine." I clutched the records tightly, feeling their power coursing through me. "They're not yours," I yelled back, my voice steady despite the chaos. "You cannot own souls." The basement trembled, and suddenly the lights flickered. Shadows danced along the walls, and the whispers transformed into screams of anguish echoing through the air. The spirits began to manifest, their ghostly forms swirling around us, a vortex of grief and anger. Dr. Hayes' eyes widened in horror as he realized he was losing control. "No! This cannot be happening," he cried, panic in his voice. The spirits surged forward, surrounding him, their anguish turning into rage. "You will pay," they screamed, their voices merging into one haunting cry. The shadows consumed him, dragging him into the darkness, his screams echoing through the basement. I watched in awe and horror as the spirits took their revenge, enveloping him in a storm of fury. The records slipped from my grasp, falling to the floor. But I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They were free now. As the chaos settled, the basement returned to a heavy silence. I felt the weight of the spirits lift, their presence no longer suffocating. I took a deep breath, my heart racing, knowing I had witnessed something monumental. But as I gathered myself, I realized I couldn't leave yet. I needed to ensure the records were safe, to expose the truth of what Dr. Hayes had done. I knelt down, collecting the papers scattered across the floor. Each entry I read fueled my resolve. These patients deserve justice, and I would make sure their stories were told. With the records in hand, I retraced my steps through the basement, the shadows no longer threatening. As I reached the narrow passage, I paused for a moment, looking back. The echoes of their voices whispered thanks, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. I climbed through the passage, emerging back into the hospital's eerie silence. My heart raced as I made my way toward the exit, the records clutched tightly to my chest. I could feel the weight of the truth propelling me forward, knowing I had to share their story with the world. As I stepped outside, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and orange. It felt like a new beginning, not just for me, but for the souls I had freed. But a shiver ran down my spine as I remembered the darkness that had consumed Dr. Hayes. There would always be remnants of his legacy, shadows lurking in the corners of the world. I would have to stay vigilant, for evil never truly dies. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. I would uncover every secret, every dark corner of that hospital, and I would ensure that no one would ever have to endure the pain that those patients had suffered. The fight was just beginning. Have you ever stared into a mirror and felt as if it was staring back at you? I always thought it was just an odd trick of the light or my own overactive imagination. But that was before I encountered the ancient mirror, an heirloom passed down through generations in my family. It had been hidden in the attic of my grandmother's house, covered in dust and cobwebs, a relic of a time long forgotten. When I first laid eyes on it, I was mesmerized. The ornate frame, tarnished with age, seemed to whisper secrets of the past. I felt a pull towards it, an inexplicable urge to wipe away the layers of neglect and discover what lay beneath. As I carefully cleaned the glass, I noticed something unsettling. The reflection it offered was not just of me, but of shadows flickering in the corners, shadows that seemed to dance just out of sight. I had always been a skeptic. Scientific explanations were my refuge against the unexplainable. But as I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Was it the mirror itself, or was it just me? That evening, I invited my friend Sarah over. She had always been fascinated by the supernatural, a stark contrast to my rational worldview. As I shared the history of the mirror with her, I noticed how her eyes lit up with curiosity, contrasting my growing unease. "Do you believe in curses?" she asked, a playful smile spreading across her face. "Curses? No, that's just superstition," I replied, attempting to sound more confident than I felt. "It's just a mirror, right?" Yet, as night fell, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The once cozy attic felt claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in. The shadows from the mirror seemed to elongate, twisting and curling like smoke. I chuckled nervously, trying to brush off the tension. "Let's take a selfie with the mirror," Sarah exclaimed, her excitement breaking the thickening air. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. After all, what harm could come from a silly photo? As we stood in front of the mirror, I felt an unease that I couldn't explain. I smiled for the camera, but when I glanced at the reflection, my smile faded. Behind us, I saw a figure, a fleeting silhouette that vanished the moment I turned to look. I rationalized it away, attributing it to poor lighting and an overactive imagination. But then, Sarah squealed. "Look at this. The picture. There's someone behind us." I turned to see her staring at her phone, eyes wide with shock. The image showed us, but in the corner, a dark figure lurked, just as I had seen in the mirror. My heart sank. I tried to laugh it off, but inside, dread began to creep in. "Let's not dwell on this," I said, trying to shift the focus. "It's probably just a trick of the camera." But Sarah wouldn't let it go. "What if it's a spirit? Or a ghost?" I shook my head, fighting to suppress the mounting anxiety. There's no such thing as ghosts. Yet, as the night wore on, an unsettling sensation took hold of me. The shadows seemed to whisper, and the air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. I tried to focus on our conversation, but every time I glanced at the mirror, I felt a cold gaze piercing through me. Just as I was about to suggest we call it a night, the power flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. "Great," I said, forcing a laugh. "Perfect timing." I fumbled for my phone, using its light to illuminate the room. Shadows danced along the walls, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the figure again, lurking just beyond the reach of my phone's glow. "Let's go downstairs," I suggested, trying to sound more confident than I felt. As we descended the staircase, the oppressive feeling seemed to lift, but I couldn't shake the sense that something had changed. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, haunted by the lingering feeling of being watched. In the days that followed, I couldn't escape the pull of the mirror. I began to experience strange occurrences, items misplaced, whispers in the night, and that unsettling feeling of being followed. Each time I looked into the mirror, I felt the shadows closing in, beckoning me to uncover their secrets. The allure of the mirror became an obsession. I needed to know what it was hiding. What I didn't realize was that the more I looked, the more I was drawn into its depths. I had unknowingly crossed a line, a threshold between the known and the unknown. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself growing increasingly paranoid. My friends began to notice the change in me, how I flinched at sudden sounds, how I kept looking over my shoulder as if someone were following me. I tried to confide in Sarah, but each time I mentioned the mirror, she would laugh it off, dismissing my fears as paranoia. "Come on, it's just a mirror," she said, rolling her eyes. "You need to chill." But I couldn't. The shadows were growing bolder, and I felt a compulsion to return to the attic to confront whatever it was that had taken root in my life. It was as if the mirror had become a portal, and I was teetering on the brink of discovery or disaster. The attic loomed before me like a monster waiting to be awakened. Each creaking step I took up the staircase echoed ominously, amplifying my anxiety. The shadows seemed thicker today, wrapping around me like a shroud, whispering secrets I couldn't decipher. Yet, a part of me craved the truth, as if knowing would release the grip of fear that had tightened around my chest. As I reached the attic, the dusty old mirror awaited, its surface reflecting the dim light from my phone. I hesitated, feeling a surge of trepidation, but my curiosity pushed me forward. What was so special about this mirror? Why did it seem to call out to me? I approached it cautiously, examining the ornate frame closer. Carvings of unfamiliar symbols lined the edges, twisting into grotesque faces that seemed to watch my every move. I reached out a trembling hand to touch the cool surface of the glass, a thrill of electricity coursing through me. But as I did, my reflection flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw something that made my heart race, a fleeting image of a darkened room filled with shadows. "What the hell?" I muttered, stepping back as panic surged within me. My mind raced. Was this just a trick of the light, or was the mirror showing me something more? I took a deep breath and leaned in again, this time focusing intently on the glass. My reflection stared back, eyes wide with fear. But as I gazed deeper, the shadows began to shift, swirling and coiling like smoke, forming shapes I couldn't quite make out. It was as if something was trying to reach out to me from the other side. "Is anyone there?" I whispered, half hoping for a response, half fearing it. Silence enveloped me, thick and heavy, making the air feel stifling. But just as I turned to leave, I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I whipped back to the mirror, breathless. There it was again, an indistinct shadow, growing larger, more defined. My heart raced as I strained to see. It was no longer just a blur, it had form and substance. I stepped back in terror, my instincts screaming at me to run, yet a morbid curiosity held me captive. "Please, show yourself." I dared to call out, a mixture of fear and fascination fueling my words. The shadow wavered and then began to shift into something more familiar, a figure, its outline ethereal, like smoke given form. I blinked, and for a second, I thought I recognized it. "Anna?" I gasped, the name escaping my lips before I could think. It was the name of my late aunt, who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. I had always believed her death was a tragic accident, but rumors whispered of something darker, a family curse tied to the mirror. "Help me," the voice echoed softly, a pleading whisper that chilled me to the bone. It felt real, raw, and full of desperation. I stumbled back, colliding with a wooden chest, its contents spilling onto the floor, a jumble of old photographs and forgotten memories. No, this isn't happening," I whispered, my heart racing. I turned to leave, but the mirror seemed to pull at me, anchoring me in place. I fought against the urge to flee, knowing that if I left now, I might never find the truth. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "If you're really there, show me," I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. The shadow flickered again, growing clearer, and the air around me began to shimmer. I could see her features, hollow cheeks, eyes wide with terror, and a mouth that moved but produced no sound. The reflection shifted, showing flashes of her life, a room filled with old trinkets, a child's laughter echoing, and then a sudden darkness enveloping everything. Panic surged through me as I realized I was witnessing her last moments. I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach, the fear transforming into a heavy sadness. It was as if I were intruding on something deeply personal. I didn't want to witness her pain, yet I was powerless to look away. "Anna, what happened to you?" I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. But the shadows around her twisted, obscuring her form. I stepped closer, my heart pounding as I reached out, desperate to connect. Just as my fingers brushed the surface of the glass, a wave of cold enveloped me, and I was pulled forward. My breath caught in my throat as the world around me shifted. I felt the familiar confines of the attic dissolve, replaced by a swirling darkness that felt alive, pulsating with energy. Suddenly, I was no longer standing in the attic. I was somewhere else, an endless expanse of shadows and whispers. Panic gripped me as I realized I was trapped, suspended between worlds, with no clear way back. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and all around me, voices echoed, calling my name, taunting me. "Welcome to the mirror," a voice hissed, smooth and serpentine. "You wanted the truth, didn't you?" I turned in circles, my heart racing, but all I could see were shifting shadows that twisted and turned like a nightmare I couldn't escape. "What do you want?" I shouted into the void, but the only response was laughter, echoing, mocking, chilling. The laughter faded into silence, leaving me alone in the suffocating darkness. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribcage, a frantic drumbeat that echoed in the void. Panic clawed at my throat as I stumbled forward, seeking something, anything, that could anchor me in this surreal nightmare. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling, barely breaking the heavy silence. Each step felt weighted, as if the shadows were pulling me back, trying to keep me trapped in their web. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, whispering secrets I couldn't decipher. In the distance, I caught sight of a flickering light, a beacon in this abyss. I surged toward it, the warmth of hope igniting my spirit, pushing me past the creeping dread that threatened to consume me. As I drew closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. It was a room eerily familiar, a perfect replica of my childhood bedroom, down to the peeling wallpaper and the old, chipped dresser. In the center, a mirror stood, identical to the one in the attic, yet it seemed more alive, pulsating with energy. I approached cautiously, drawn in by the flickering reflections that danced across its surface. This time, I could see images of my past, my family gathered for holidays, my friends laughing at parties, moments of joy that now felt like ghosts. But the happiness quickly faded, replaced by scenes that twisted and darkened. I saw myself standing alone in the corner of a room, tears streaming down my face, surrounded by shadows that loomed large and threatening. My heart ached as I witnessed my childhood fears replaying in vivid detail. The shadowy figures whispered accusations, their voices filled with contempt. "Remember the darkness, the loneliness? You can never escape," they taunted, their words wrapping around me like chains. I stumbled back, horrified. "No, that's not true," I cried, but the shadows only laughed, a cacophony of despair that echoed in my mind. Then, as if the mirror had a will of its own, it showed me Anna again. This time, she was not alone. She stood in the same room, but her eyes were filled with despair. I could see the shadows curling around her, pulling her down into darkness, and she seemed to fight against them, desperation etched on her face. "Help me," she cried, her voice a haunting echo. "They won't let me go. You must break the curse. Anna, I'm here. I'll help you." I shouted, feeling the weight of her sorrow press against me. But before I could reach out, the mirror shattered, splintering into a million shards that scattered around me, the pieces falling into the abyss. Suddenly, the room began to dissolve, and I was thrust back into the void. The laughter returned, sharper and more mocking than before. "You think you can save her? You're just a pawn in our game," the voice sneered. "But don't worry, you'll have your chance to play." Before I could respond, the shadows surged forward, enveloping me in darkness. I felt myself being pulled apart, stretched thin between worlds, and just when I thought I would be torn to pieces, I landed hard on the floor, my childhood bedroom. I gasped, blinking against the harsh light that filled the room. Everything seemed the same, yet something was undeniably wrong. The air felt heavy, thick with an oppressive force, and the shadows clung to the corners, watching with hungry eyes. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, and spotted the shattered mirror remnants scattered across the floor. Each shard reflected a different scene, my reflection twisted into grotesque forms, my face melting and reforming into faces of people I had known and lost. I staggered backward, pressing my back against the wall as the shadows began to shift, coalescing into a figure that stepped forward, emerging from the darkness. It was Anna, but something about her felt off. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth twisted into a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Welcome back, dear cousin," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness yet laced with malice. "You've come to play, haven't you? Anna?" I stammered, disbelief washing over me. "Is it really you?" "Yes, it's me, but you're too late." She moved closer, her smile widening as she gestured to the shards of glass. "You see, the game has already begun. The mirror holds our fate, and now you're part of it." "Part of what?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" "To break the curse, of course," she replied, her tone shifting from sweet to sinister. "But to do that, you must confront your deepest fears, your past, your regrets. Only then can we escape this nightmare." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "I can't do this alone, Anna. I need your help." Her laughter filled the room, echoing against the walls. "Oh, but you are not alone. You are surrounded by all the darkness you've ignored, all the shadows you've tried to hide from. And they will come for you. Are you ready to face them?" I felt a surge of determination mixed with dread. "I'll do whatever it takes," I replied, though fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve. "Very well," Anna said, her eyes glinting with a mix of hope and something darker. "Let the game begin." As she stepped back, the shadows around us thickened, swirling into forms that loomed larger than life. I braced myself, heart pounding, knowing I had to confront my past if I ever wanted to escape this twisted game. The shadows around us began to pulse with an eerie life, coalescing into figures that danced menacingly in the dim light. My heart raced as I recognized familiar faces twisted by time and anguish. Each figure held a fragment of my past, friends who had turned away, family who had been lost, and, most hauntingly, my own reflection, distorted and monstrous. "Face them," Anna urged, her voice echoing in the growing chaos. They are the echoes of your fears, the reflections of your regrets. You must confront them to break the curse. The figures moved closer, their forms shifting and flickering like a broken film reel. I could hear their whispers, weaving through the air like threads of despair. You abandoned us, they murmured. You let us go. Each accusation felt like a dagger, piercing through the fragile veil of my courage. No, I shouted, shaking my head. I didn't abandon you. I didn't know how to help. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped forward, a friend from my childhood, lost to a tragic accident. His face was hollow, eyes darkened with sorrow. You could have saved me, he said, his voice a haunting echo. But you chose to look away. Panic gripped me. I tried. I was just a kid. I didn't know. The shadows closed in tighter, their whispers growing louder, more chaotic. I could feel the weight of their accusations pressing down on me, suffocating in its intensity. The room spun around me, and I felt as if I were being pulled in all directions, torn between memories I wished to forget and the desperate need to confront them. Face the truth. Anna cried, her voice rising above the din. You cannot escape your past, but you can change how it defines you. With a surge of determination, I took a step forward. You are not my past. You are just shadows. I shouted, forcing myself to confront each figure. I focused on my friend, his sorrow-filled eyes piercing into my soul. I'm sorry. I should have been there. I should have done more. The shadows flickered and my confession wavered like flames in a breeze. I felt a rush of warmth flow through me, mingling with the cold dread that had gripped my heart. I can't change what happened, I continued, voice steadying, but I can carry your memory with me and learn from it. The figures seemed to soften, the harsh lines of despair fading as I spoke. I forgive you, he whispered, his voice a breath of wind. With that, he dissolved into mist, the shadows around me shimmering in response. Encouraged by this small victory, I turned to the next figure, the face of my sister, who had struggled with her own demons. You didn't save me, she lamented, tears streaming down her face. You let me slip away. No. I was lost myself. I exclaimed, feeling the anguish twist in my chest. I thought you were strong enough to fight alone. I didn't see your pain. Her expression shifted, sorrow melting into understanding. But you can see it now, she said softly, and like the friend before her, she faded into a swirl of light, releasing me from the weight of her grief. Each figure I confronted seemed to dissolve into a glow, their pain lifted as I acknowledged my regrets. It was a brutal process, confronting every shadow of my past, but with each confession, I felt lighter, more liberated. As the last figure, my own reflection, stepped forward, I felt a cold sweat break out on my brow. It was a grotesque version of myself, twisted by fear and guilt. You are weak, it sneered, you will always be haunted by your failures. I stood my ground. I am not weak, I asserted, my voice echoing in the charged air. I've faced my fears, my past. I won't let you control me anymore. I will learn from you instead of being chained by you. The reflection recoiled, and for the first time, I saw something resembling fear in its eyes. It quivered, flickering in and out of focus as if losing its grip on reality. You can't escape me, it hissed, but its voice lacked the conviction it once held. I already have, I replied, feeling the truth of my words resonate within me. You are just a part of my journey, not the end of it. With a final, shuddering breath, the reflection shattered, breaking apart like glass and dissolving into the air. The shadows began to recede, their forms fading into the light, leaving only Anna standing before me, her smile genuine now, radiant with warmth. You did it, she said, her eyes shining with pride. You faced them, and now you're free. But as the shadows cleared, a chilling realization dawned on me. The room began to spin once again, and I found myself drawn toward the mirror at the far wall, the remnants of our confrontation swirling within it. "What's happening?" I asked, fear creeping back into my voice. "It's time to return," Anna said, stepping closer. "But remember, you carry these lessons with you. You must find your own way back to reality." "No, I can't leave you here," I cried, reaching for her. But she took a step back, her form shimmering like a mirage. "You've freed yourself, now free me," she urged, her voice echoing as the mirror began to pull me in. "Live for both of us. Don't forget." With a final surge of energy, I was sucked into the mirror's depths, the light blinding as I felt myself being pulled through the fabric of reality. And then, with a sharp gasp, I found myself back in my attic, the shards of the old mirror scattered around me. The room was silent, the air thick with the weight of what had transpired. I collapsed on the floor, heart racing, tears streaming down my face. I was free, but I could still feel Anna's presence lingering in my heart, a bittersweet reminder of the journey I had undertaken. As I looked at the remaining shards, I realized they held no power over me anymore. I stood up slowly, determination coursing through my veins. I would honor Anna by living fully, embracing each moment, cherishing the memories of those lost, and carrying their lessons into the future. With newfound clarity, I stepped away from the remnants of the past, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that my reflection was no longer a source of fear, but a reminder of strength. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.